绿树红果，我不在的时候，绿树在那里，然后我走过了它，然后绿树的前面还有绿树，树杈中间有太阳。
Welcome to the Elixir podcast, where we ask people from all walks of life and from around the world what their favourite poem is and why it's important to them, why or how it speaks to their heart. If you have a poem that you would like to share and would like to appear on the podcast, please contact me at helenwing@me.com. Hello and welcome to today's Elixir Poetry Podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Nicky Harman, who is a translator of Chinese literature and also the trustee of a charity called Paper Republic, which promotes Chinese literature in translation. Hello, Nicky.
Hello, I'm delighted to be with you today.
I hear you're going to talk to us about a poet called Han Dong, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Han Dong has been quite an important poet since the 80s, when he was one of the pioneering, completely different poets from the poets who went before, who rejected anything to do with political, heroic poems. And he's been writing poetry ever since. And I think what I love about his poetry is that there's a lot of variety in it. Some of the early ones were very iconoclastic, and they really are anti-political, but also anti-grandiose. And they're so simple, you think, what's all this about? But then you realize that he writes in minute detail and very visually. And sometimes the effect is incredibly moving, and sometimes it's funny. And he has poems about dogs. He's very keen on dogs, so we share that interest. So, shall I just start with one of his most beautiful poems?
Yes.
So this was written in 2008, so relatively recent, because you think he started writing in the 1980s. And it's one of the beautiful, rather visual, painterly ones, and it's called Green Tree, Red Fruit. The green tree was there before I was. Then I walked past it. Then ahead of the green tree, there were more green trees. Between the forked branches was the sun. I looked right at the sun. Just then it was like a red fruit, and so the whole garden became an orchard. A flurry of footsteps came. A buzzing of voices debated life. People's shadows circled, gathered like gnats. The evening star, a great cool teardrop. I am still here. The red fruit gone. The green tree dulled.
Oh, wow. That actually really reminds me of a poem by Lorca about watching the night fall over an orchard, with the same thing, with the washing out of colour. Amazing. And I can see what you mean by its painterliness. It takes you right there, doesn't it? You're just right in that. You're in that orchard with him as the sun's going down.
I mean, as I said, his poetry is very varied, but there's a strand which observes nature, and he loves nature. As I said, he loves many things. Dogs. Then he writes about his feelings about women, which I feel probably are poems now that he's become staid and middle-aged that he probably wouldn't repeat now, but we'll see, because he's got a whole load of new poetry coming up, which he's written for the Manchester Literary Festival this year. So
is he coming to the Manchester Festival?
Yes, he is. Yeah. So he's going to be there the first week of June, and I'll get there'll be 10 or a dozen poems which I'll get beforehand to translate. And the one that I read and the ones that I'm talking about today come from this volume, which is a lot earlier, 2012, published by Zephyr Press.
Okay, we'll put a link to that in the information sheet about this podcast, so people can find it if they want. Did you translate this poem?
I translated this one. Yeah, this collection has poems translated by other people as well. But I've decided to read today the ones that I translated, not just because I love them and I also like my own translation of them, but I think when you translate poetry, it's such an intense experience. You kind of, it's so people ask me, well, how do you do the translation of a poem? It's completely different from translating fiction. It's much more minute, every phrase, every character, every word. I kind of have to go into it as deeply as I can. And so I suppose it comes from the gut. It doesn't come from my head. It comes from somewhere deep inside me, the translation. And so I've read the poems really, really intently over and over. So that's why I chose.
Do you feel that you have to try and, if you like, recreate the beauty of it in another language? That it's not, that somehow the demand is greater, higher, when it's such a small piece of work, a small poem, that you have to be able to convey as many multiple meanings and readings as possible in it.
Yes. But I try not to think in fact, I don't even think I'm tempted to think intellectually about it. I just try to get into it, and it comes from, whatever comes out comes from deep inside me. As for whether I want to recreate the beauty, that rather depends whether it was beautiful in the first place. If it's funny, I tried to make it funny. There are one or two poems of his which I don't think are his best, and they're not in this book anyway. But I simply thought, I can't do that poem. It doesn't grab me. It's not beautiful. It's not touching.
I know that even though he spoke in the first person there, it's almost like you can immediately identify and be that person. That he's somehow distancing himself from his personal identity in that poem, so that when you read it, you can be that person who's in the orchard. Maybe that is moving.
I mean, most of his poetry is first person, which that's a really interesting point, because I'd never thought of that before. It's never occurred to me. Yeah, he normally does write in a very personal way, and it's first person. But also some of his poems are extremely abstract. They're clinical, even though they're first person.
Exactly.
That first person is going in really weird places.
Yeah. Okay, what's your next poem?
Oh, yeah, this is one which is called The Worker's Hand. And I suppose I chose it because I did think it was laugh out loud funny, but I also didn't know if I was supposed to find it funny. I could say it's not particularly politically correct one, but I don't think you need to take it too seriously. It's kind of a man's poem. I certainly can't imagine a woman writing this poem. But it's also not, I don't find it at all offensive, and I hope other people wouldn't. I just don't take it terribly seriously. But I love the rhythm of it. So it's called The Worker's Hand. So you have to imagine the worker hanging from some bit of scaffolding outside some half-constructed building in China. He hangs suspended from the building. The hand that grips the wall is motionless. A woman should fall in love with that hand, should receive its caresses. A man should have a hand like that, strong, grimy, like a fleshy sucker pad. A woman should be that wall, drop down a bit, or better still, lie down. A man should hold that woman in a vice-like grip, his body soaked in sweat, but not his hand, no leaping heart or quivering legs. If this is fetishism, then let's love this way. The worker's hand is a marvelous tool. So, I hope people won't find it offensive, but I just think.
But also, I mean, it's brilliant. It's his contradiction as a as a poet who clearly doesn't have a worker's hand, but as someone who was, from what I can gather, very, very committed to the communist project, and has worked within the framework of Chinese intellectualism, hasn't he? That's been part of the Writers' Association and so on.
No, not at all. No, absolutely not at all. He's always been a rebel, particularly in the 80s. But yeah, no, I'd say he's never worked within the communist project. But on the other hand, in the end,
yeah, but when he was young, he did, though, didn't he? He taught Marxism and Leninism at various colleges, and then resigned from teaching to carry on with his writing. Maybe he was disillusioned at that point when he was very young.
No, I don't think he was ever illusioned. He had to get a job when he just graduated from university.
Yeah.
That was the job he was assigned.
Yeah.
Those were the days when you were assigned jobs. And I never asked him about that period in his life because it was all so long ago. I mean, it was like over 40 years ago. But in those days, you got given a job, and I think as soon as he was
what you were told
able to leave it, in other words, able to live fairly basic level, he was never rich.
Mm-hmm.
He just got out.
Yeah. So
the whole point of his work during the 80s and 90s was that he was a rebel.
Yeah, and that he was an iconoclast. Yeah. And as you say, was rejecting the sort of, if you like, elitism of poetry. Or did you call it, the heroism or nobility?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, the grandiose, the big project of, I mean, there were two strands. There was the poetry under Mao, which served the people in the 50s, 60s, 70s, which supported the heroic socialist project. But then after that, at the beginning of the 80s, you got poets like Bei Dao, who were highly abstract, also rejected the politicization of poetry, but they were very, very high. Yes, very highly intellectual.
Yeah.
Very complex. Their language was very complex. Then along came Han Dong, who was then quite a young man, and his poetry was what people have called, what he himself has called, Minjian, of the people. That doesn't mean it was folk or folksy, absolutely not. And it also is apparently, you could take it as colloquial, but colloquial also doesn't really describe it. It's much more precise than colloquial.
But this poem seems to speak to that personality, doesn't it? And
yes, yeah,
exactly.
This one is definitely the worker's hand is definitely a Minjian, of the people poem, whereas the green tree and red fruit is more deliberately poetic, but also in very simple language. So the simple language is carefully crafted. I think that's what I'm getting at. His simple language is very carefully crafted.
And in a way, you've been a real witness to this changing of the way that culture works in China, because from what you've told me, you were in China quite a long time ago. Your first visit, wasn't it, in 1975? And you've continued visiting, being there. So you must have witnessed changes in the way that, not just in the society in general and the material of the society, but also in the way that people think and are allowed to think or not allowed to think, depending on the political moment they're in. Have you been aware of that?
Yes.
Going back?
I mean, it's I'm always very hesitant about making generalizations about how Chinese people live and how they think and how artists and writers work and think, because there are so many of them, and they're all individuals, and it's a huge geographical area, and being in one area of China may be completely different from being in another area. But I mean, there are obvious differences between what I saw in the mid-70s. After that, you see, I didn't go again for another 10, 15 years. So really the 70s was a snapshot of what China was like at the end of the Cultural Revolution. I mean, I went on a friendship tour. We did factories. At that time, I had no Chinese friends, so there was really nobody in China that I was going to meet. And it really wasn't until 1989 when I did have people to see.
I was interested and struck by what you said about people talking about China or the Chinese, because this is something that cropped up again and again when I was living in China, when foreigners would bring together the whole of the Chinese people in one phrase, the Chinese, you know. And I do think one of the strengths of reading poets is that you have to automatically have an understanding of how different everybody is. You know, if you read a range of poets in Chinese, these poets are all so different. And like you say, depending which region they come from, their level of education, their belief structures, their relationships, and suddenly this huge country becomes more, not understandable, but more you can engage with it more because you drop your stereotypical understandings of a mass of people. I think it happens with lots of countries. I think people do the same with large countries, with the United States and with Russia in particular. There is this tendency, if you are not from that country and you don't understand much about that country, to just lump the entire community into one phrase. And it's just not revealing or interesting, and it doesn't increase your understanding at all of people.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And the more individual Chinese, Russian, American, Brits, but in this case, we're talking about Chinese. The more people you know, the more you realize that life is so different for all of them. Even if we narrow it down to poetry, Han Dong is now, let me think, he's mid-60s. There are many poets who've come up behind him, and they're all very different. I mean, you've got the worker poets, you've got a lot of really interesting women poets who are of different age group, those in their 20s, 30s, those who are about the same age as Han Dong, and those in the middle. And I mean, it's fascinating. I don't regard myself really as a translator of poetry. I translate fiction most of the time, but I am aware that it's a very broad field, and I regard it as a great privilege to at least to have been able to translate Han Dong's poems, and I'm really interested to see what he turns up with for the Manchester Festival, because they will be published as well.
I'd like to mention to our listeners that we are incredibly privileged, because at the end of this podcast, when we put the poems out in Chinese, the very person who will be reading those poems is Han Dong himself, which is a huge privilege, and we're very grateful that he's taking the time to read us his poetry. It's really nice. It's the first time we've had that happen. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. No, I'm sure that he'll really enjoy reading them to people.
So what is your third poem?
Oh, right. Okay, I'm just going to read this, and I think I'm going to have a lot of difficulty in saying why I find it so striking. I just can't put a finger on it, but I love it. Okay, so here we are. It's called The Chicken Seller. Okay. You've got to think wet markets in China with various types of meat, some of them still alive, in amongst all the fruit and vegetables. The chicken seller. He's got the knack for killing chickens quick. So he became a chicken seller. That way, he doesn't need to kill people. Even though he acts calm and gentle and never beats his wife, taking off his wife's clothes is like plucking a chicken. Similar skills always overlap, just as cruelty and kindness are two sides of the same coin. He plucks, and she leisurely takes the money. And I feel that therein lies a kind of evil sweetness. I mean, that's so weird. It's not
that's
even
incredible. I love that poem.
It's not even particularly representative of Han Dong's poetry. I mean, if you look at this volume, I think that kind of stands out. It's a bit of an outlier because normally you could regard it as a bit sadistic.
Why did it appeal to you? I get the feeling that you actually really appreciate it when a writer self-ironizes, when there's a little bit of humor in.
Yes, I do enjoy the touches of humor in his poetry.
And that's not taking himself so seriously and not buying into this heroic voice, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But one reason why I like it, I mean, this is possibly at the most basic level, is because I grew up on a farm and preparing animals, birds, for slaughter. Then they go to the butchers. All the processes that happen before you actually buy the meat in the supermarket. It was just part of our everyday lives. And I think nowadays most people find that quite weird because very few people have actually slaughtered a chicken.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect, but it's not only that. It's to do with the way his thoughts take him from the very basic aspect of plucking a chicken, killing and plucking a chicken, to the relationship between the man and the woman, between the relationship between kindness and cruelty. And then there's a comment which you could interpret in a number of different ways about the way the husband treats his wife, but not the way the wife treats her husband. So you could think about that. I mean, it's a poem which allows you to let your imagination run a bit wild.
Yeah.
And you may find you don't actually like the places it takes you.
It's also true of the worker's hand as well, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, his poetry is not, most of his poetry is not like that. There are very gentle, very sweet ones. There are the very lyrical, very painterly ones. There are the very abstract, intellectual ones. So in a sense, the last two that I've read are both somewhat outliers.
But they're the ones that you particularly like. So that's.
Well, I had a real problem. I looked through this book and I actually chose about 6 and I didn't know how to narrow it down. So I just went for those 3.
If our listeners are interested in reading more Han Dong, is there anywhere online where they can read poems from that book, for instance?
Yes. The best thing to do is to have a look at Han Dong's author page on Paper Republic.
All right.
Which I can share with you because I've put up all the links to his poems which are available to read online. For instance, about 7-8 years ago, one was published in The Guardian, and that can still be read online. And there are various others. So,
so we can post some links on the author page. Now,
that would be great.
Now, Han Dong's not from Beijing, is he? He's from Nanjing. Does he live?
He's from Nanjing.
Yeah, and does he live there now? Has he always been separate from the capital, if you like? Where's he living?
Yeah, Nanjing, born and bred, and still in Nanjing. So when
do you think that
first
has influenced his perspective, if you like, on writing and on his world? Because he's a very, I wouldn't say pastoral, but they're not urban poems.
Yeah. Well, Nanjing is a huge city, but I mean, they have taken me some beautiful places in the countryside around Nanjing, especially a couple of years ago, which was the last time I visited. No, last year they took me to some gorgeous places. And it's slightly ironic, I suppose, that you think of China as more and more urbanized. And that's true. But with increasing wealth, there's more access to the countryside. So we went to a lovely restaurant in a village. The restaurant served vegan, vegetarian food, and it was all organic, and it was all grown in the area.
Wow.
And this was a selling point. And so, that level of sophistication operates in China in many areas now. And when I first knew Han Dong and his wife, they were living in a one-room flat, and they didn't have a car, and so they couldn't have gone to all these places. In fact, those places didn't exist. But their standard of living has gone up. They've now got a car, and they live quite comfortably. So that is a reflection of the way some people have become middle class in China. So I suppose I could make that generalization in reference to your previous question.
Will you carry on translating poetry then? Sounds as if you do enjoy it. I guess it's not very lucrative.
Probably not. And it's not to do with the money. It's that I really regard myself as a better translator of fiction than translator of poetry.
So how did you come to do Han Dong's poetry? Was that because you knew him personally?
Yes. Yeah, I was introduced to him by a woman called Xinran, who lives in London, and a lot of her work has been translated. And he asked me to. And I really, really enjoy translating his poems, and I really look forward to seeing what he's written for the Manchester Literary Festival. But on the whole, other people's poetry, no, I leave to other translators, and I'm sure they do it much better than me.
But in Paper Republic, you have quite a lot of poets represented, don't you? So do you have other translators for Chinese poetry on the board, if you like, of Paper Republic?
Yes, yeah. In our group, our Paper Republic volunteers group, and she, her name is Du Chen, and in fact, you know her because she's done something for you.
Oh, that's right. She did a podcast for us.
On your podcast. And she's very keen on poetry. But people can put on Paper Republic links to any poems that they've translated. And so she did, and she keeps those links up to date. So people who work on Paper Republic, our small group of volunteers, they really take what aspects of Chinese literature that they like most. So they could be keen on sci-fi, poetry. I keep up the web pages of certain authors that I'm very keen on.
Wonderful. Now, Nicky, turning to you a little bit just for a moment to your personal life, you also speak Spanish, am I right?
I do speak and read Spanish.
And have you ever translated?
Yes, yeah. I've never thought of translating it, basically because there are so many very good translators out there.
Yeah.
Oh, I suppose many years ago, when I started translating from Chinese, and there was really very little work that I could find, I did wonder whether I should switch to Spanish. But my Spanish is mainly Chilean Spanish, and it is mainly spoken. And yes, I could, but why when there are so many good translators from Spanish? So I just enjoy reading in Spanish and reading translations from Spanish.
And as a final question for you, what drove you into this profession? What was it a drive to tell the world about the wonderful things that Chinese people write about, or was it just something that, a talent, an aptitude in you for words? How did you settle on being a translator?
Yeah. Well, I didn't give up the day job for quite a long time. I kind of fell into translating. I was asked to translate a novel by someone who was married to a writer. I translated it. It got published. I was immediately hooked. I just thought, I love this. I love translating. I do have a talent for it. But I carried on with the day job for some years after that. And I just regard it as an immense privilege to be able to translate and be able to present to English language readers what Chinese writers are writing.
That's wonderful. Nicky, thank you so much for coming to tell us about Han Dong. I wonder if in your last couple of minutes, if you could just read all 3 poems one more time so that our listeners can hear it in the context that you have given it.
Okay. I'll start with Green Tree, Red Fruit.
Mm-hmm.
The green tree was there before I was. Then I walked past it. Then ahead of the green tree, there were more green trees. Between the forked branches was the sun. I looked right at the sun. Just then it was like a red fruit, and so the whole garden became an orchard. A flurry of footsteps came. A buzzing of voices debated life. People's shadows circled, gathered like gnats. The evening star, a great cool teardrop. I am still here. The red fruit gone, the green tree dulled.
绿树红果，我不在的时候，绿树在那里，然后我走过了它，然后绿树的前面还有绿树，树杈中间有太阳。我直视太阳，此刻它就像红果，因此整个园子都成了果园。一些足音纷至沓来，嗡嗡的人声议论着生活，人影如虫猛盘旋聚集，惊心如一滴大大的清凉的眼泪。我仍然在那里，红果已经消失，绿树失色。
So visual. Yeah.
The worker's hand. He hangs suspended from the building. The hand that grips the wall is motionless. A woman should fall in love with that hand, should receive its caresses. A man should have a hand like that, strong, grimy, like a fleshy sucker pad. A woman should be that wall, drop down a bit, or better still, lie down. A man should hold that woman in a vice-like grip, his body soaked in sweat, but not his hand, no leaping heart or quivering legs. If this is fetishism, then let's love this way. The worker's hand is a marvelous tool.
工人的手，他悬挂在高楼上，抓着墙的手，纹丝不动。我觉得是女人就应该爱上这只手，就应该接受它的抚摸；是男人就应该有这样的手，结实、肮脏，像吸盘肉垫；是女人就应该做那面墙，降低一些吧，最好躺下；是男人就应该死死地抓住那女人，浑身大汗淋漓，但手不出汗，心不跳，腿也不抖。如果是个练武癖，就这样练吧。工人的手也是最棒的工具。
The chicken seller. He's got the knack for killing chickens quick. So he became a chicken seller. That way, he doesn't need to kill people. Even though he acts calm and gentle and never beats his wife, taking off his wife's clothes is like plucking a chicken. Similar skills always overlap, just as cruelty and kindness are two sides of the same coin. He plucks, and she leisurely takes the money. And I feel that therein lies a kind of evil sweetness.
卖鸡的，他拥有迅速杀鸡的技艺，因此成了一个卖鸡的。这样，他就不需要杀人，即使在心里。他的生活平静温馨，从不打老婆。脱去老婆的衣服，就像给鸡褪毛。相似的记忆总有相通之处，残暴与温柔也总是此消彼长。当他脱鸡毛，他老婆 慢腾腾的收钱的时候，我总觉得这里面有某种罪恶的甜蜜。
If you're a regular listener and are enjoying the podcast, it would mean the world to me if you could hit the follow button on your podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review and a 5-star rating. Remember, you can find the poems that feature in each episode on my website, helenwing.com. If you'd like to support the production costs of our Elixir Poetry podcast, please feel free to buy me a coffee. Thanks for listening.